He was known simply as Eddie. Not as Mr. Jameson. Not sir, merely Eddie. It was the sort of name bestowed by individuals who had already concluded one's insignificance. Eddie Jameson, aged 74, held his post at the west gate of Worthington Military Academy. Precisely at 5:45 each morning, he would appear, clad in a well-worn security jacket adorned with a mended name tag, a steaming thermos clutched in his hand, offering a quiet nod to every passing cadet. The gesture was seldom reciprocated. His commute was always on foot. To the youthful officers and cadets, he was an invisible presence. An elderly man with complaining knees, a clipboard, and antiquated notions. Behind his back, some would share hushed jests. Others did not even bother to lower their voices. Lieutenant Carter, a prominent rising figure at the academy, once remarked derisively, "I'd wager he believes Morse code is still the key to winning wars." Eddie remained silent. What they were unaware of, what no one had ever thought to inquire about, was that he had once guided hundreds of men across foreign territories under starless nights, that he kept medals stored in a shoebox beneath his bed. That his reticence was not a sign of frailty but of seasoned experience, choosing its moments wisely. During his midday meal, he would sit in solitude, consuming the same fare daily: black coffee, a sandwich, and a single apple, his notebook invariably close at hand, filled with observations that no one realized he was documenting. He spoke infrequently, yet he observed everything. Cadet Arya Bennett was among the small number who took notice. On her inaugural day, she had offered him a salute. He had acknowledged it without a moment's delay. "My father advised me to never assess a man by his designation," she shared with him. "A wise father," Eddie had responded. She observed his movements, deliberate, exact, never rushed. She noted his habit of surveying the tree line while others were engrossed in their phones, and how he would verify the gate latch 3 times before concluding his shift. While others disregarded him, she perceived something more. Not an individual mired in the past, but a man in a state of readiness. And this readiness, she would soon comprehend, was not inactivity. It was a form of preparation. By the commencement of September's second week, the jokes had shed any pretense of subtlety. "Does Eddie even have a clue what a drone is?" "I'm positive I heard him inquire if GPS units still required batteries." "Be cautious. Don't exhale too vigorously near the old fellow. He might just drift away." Cadets would snicker as they passed. Officers would chuckle within the confines of their break rooms. No one uttered these things directly to Eddie's face, but it was unnecessary. Their inflection conveyed enough. In their eyes, Eddie Jameson was innocuous, obsolete, merely a fixture. He manned the west gate. He nodded. He consumed coffee. That constituted the entirety of his perceived role. Yet, in reality, it wasn't their words that inflicted the deepest wound. It was their tone, the nonchalant dismissal, the collective assumption that his time had passed and his opportunities were missed. He was endured. A background element, a uniformed prop. Lieutenant Carter, consistently the most vociferous presence in any room, appeared to derive personal amusement from it. Young, with accolades, and loud, Carter embodied everything Eddie was not. He moved with a rapid stride, spoke with incisive sharpness, and recited military doctrine as if it were sacred text. One afternoon, within the officers' lounge, Carter leaned across his lunch tray, gesturing towards the window where Eddie could be observed inspecting the outer fence. "You know," he began, a smirk playing on his lips, "I did a bit of research. It seems our gate attendant was a nobody, not even having served in the ranks. A civilian contractor is the word." A smattering of cadets laughed, grateful not to be the object of ridicule. "Are you certain?" another inquired. "Absolutely," Carter affirmed with confidence. "That's the reason he keeps that notebook, so he doesn't forget his own name." More laughter ensued. From her corner, Cadet Arya Bennett remained silent. But she observed. The subsequent day, Eddie was occupied with mending the antiquated security keypad situated outside the Eastern Barracks. The keypad had been malfunctioning for several weeks, yet no one else had troubled themselves with it. Eddie, unbidden and without fanfare, had brought his own tools and set about the task. As he was kneeling, a pair of impeccably shined boots came into view. It was Lieutenant Carter. "Require some assistance, old man?" he inquired, arms folded, a feigned concern saturating each syllable. Eddie glanced up, then resumed his work on a loose wire. "No," he stated plainly. "No, sir," Carter amended, a hint of laughter in his voice. "We do still observe rank in this institution." Eddie rose slowly, his demeanor not defensive, merely composed. "I wasn't aware that gate duty necessitated salutes," he remarked. Carter leaned in slightly. "Everything necessitates respect, particularly from the support staff." For a protracted moment, the two men simply stood there, one inflated with youthful self-assurance, the other as immobile as stone. Eddie eventually spoke. "Respect is not conferred by stripes. It is manifested through silence." Carter gave a dismissive scoff. "Indeed, well, silence doesn't halt intruders." He then turned and departed. That evening, Arya, walking by the security kiosk, discovered Eddie by himself, taking sips of his coffee and making entries in his notebook by the faint illumination. She paused at the entrance. "I overheard what Carter said," she started in a low voice. "He doesn't understand you." Eddie did not raise his head. "He has no need to." "But he ought to," she insisted. Eddie then turned to face her. His eyes were tranquil, yet grave. "I am not here to be understood. I am here to perceive what others overlook." She nodded, uncertain of how to respond. Before she could pivot to depart, he appended, "They consistently laugh until the moment they can no longer afford to." The following day, during a simulated breach exercise, the alarm system failed to activate promptly. The delay was almost imperceptible, yet sufficient to cause a loss of crucial seconds. Lieutenant Carter attributed the issue to technical interference. Cadets muttered about defective programming. But Eddie, earlier that morning, had already been at the main control panel, scrutinizing the timestamps. He issued no public statement, made no formal complaints. Instead, he recalibrated the system clock by hand and recorded the calibration discrepancy, an issue the automated system had overlooked for weeks. By midday, the security notifications were functioning with perfect synchronicity. Carter claimed responsibility for the fix before the commanding officers. Eddie uttered nothing, but Arya observed. She invariably did. By the close of the week, a subtle change began to manifest. Not involving Carter or the other officers, but amongst the cadets. A number of them started to address Eddie by his name. Some would quietly pose questions regarding perimeter zones or prevailing weather conditions. One even paused by the booth, inquiring awkwardly if Eddie had any prior military service. Eddie merely offered a smile, one that suggested he knew more than he let on. Yet, the jests continued. Carter persisted in his role as the center of attention, with his displays of backslapping confidence and contemptuous wit. He spoke of combat as if it were a mere video game. He delivered commands with a volume that seemed to equate to authority. However, Arya had begun to heed a different voice, to observe a different individual. For while others ridiculed the man who meticulously inspected locks, she had come to an important understanding: those who proceed slowly often possess a more distant vision. It occurred on a Thursday, shortly before nightfall. As the academy readied itself for evening exercises, the perimeter system experienced a momentary malfunction. A brief flicker on the southeast camera feed. Most would have overlooked it. Eddie did not. He replayed the recording, his gaze intent. A shadow flitted where none should have been. There was no sound. No alarm, merely a faint anomaly near the tree line. He reported it. Potential breach. Southeast quadrant, recommend visual inspection. Lieutenant Carter's voice returned over the radio, full of dismissal. No visual confirmation. Likely just a raccoon. We're not pursuing phantoms, Eddie. But Eddie did not join in any amusement. Instead, he officially logged out for a maintenance check and proceeded to walk the perimeter, flashlight in hand. The atmosphere was humid, oppressive, and quiet. He discovered what he sought near the drainage culvert: footprints not from cadet issue boots. Civilian, clearly defined and recent, too new to be dismissed. The subsequent day, he submitted an understated report. Not via the standard channels, he possessed enough experience to know better. It was simply a folded piece of paper left on Langston's desk. Fence line compromised. Internal systems unaware. There was no immediate reply. However, that night, the breach recurred. Two individuals moved stealthily through the blind spot. They were silent, methodical, and vanished before any alarms could activate. Eddie, observing from his booth, felt a certainty deep within him. This was no longer a drill. The fourth intrusion happened without any forewarning, no piercing alarms, no flashing red indicators, simply a complete power outage. At precisely 2:17 a.m., Worthington Military Academy was plunged into darkness. Power systems failed throughout the campus. Cameras ceased recording, gates became immobile. For a full 13 minutes, the entire security apparatus was inoperative. Cadets stirred in their bunks. Lights made a brief attempt to return but remained off. Some presumed it was an exercise. Others suspected a storm. Only a single individual grasped the reality before anyone else. Eddie Jameson was already on his feet. He had not been asleep. He never slept during storms. While others fumbled for flashlights, Eddie was patrolling the north fence line. Rain made his coat slick. The wind gnawed at him, yet his stride was firm. At the southeast culvert, he paused. Footprints again, but these were different. He knelt, placing his hand on the sodden earth. The impression was new, distinct. Not a single set. Two. And they were not indicative of flight. They suggested coordination. He reached for his radio only to be met with static. The blackout had disabled communications, so he proceeded with speed and silence across the campus. Lieutenant Carter was issuing commands in the darkness. Secure the barracks. Lock down the mess hall. Provide me with a situation report. But there was no situation report to be had, no visual information, no command over the circumstances. And it was at that moment Carter comprehended a disconcerting truth. He was no longer in command. No one was. At 2:34 a.m., the emergency generator finally activated. Lights flared back to life, but it was already tardy. The intruders had vanished. No trace was left behind, save for a damaged latch and a deactivated sensor that continued to blink red. Carter burst into the control room, making loud demands, his demeanor a mixture of fury and shame. Who permitted this to occur? The reply came not from the personnel, but from a notebook. Eddie set it upon the console, open to a page meticulously detailing times, locations, and breach patterns recorded over the preceding week. You received warnings, he stated plainly. You elected not to heed them. Carter's face became red. You ought to have informed me directly. Eddie met his stare. I did. He then walked out past cadets who now held themselves a little more upright as he went by. And for the first time, they initiated the salute. The morning following the blackout, Worthington possessed a changed atmosphere. Not due to the weather or the rebooting of systems, but because no one could quite perceive Eddie Jameson in the same manner. They made an effort. Carter acted as though nothing significant had occurred. Cadets resumed their drills, yet hushed conversations spread more rapidly than formation commands. He was aware. He had documented everything. That notebook was not merely for appearances. Someone had even managed to copy a page. It made its way through the dormitories like forbidden material, an elaborate, hand-sketched map of the perimeter detailing breach intervals with precision down to the second. Someone else was heard to utter the word commander. That afternoon, General Langston made her appearance. There was no motorcade, no formal reception, merely a black sedan and a folder carried beneath her arm. She proceeded directly into the security office where Carter was once again examining the overnight logs, frantically attempting to find some justification, some rationale. Langston did not request entry. She stated unequivocally, you disregarded multiple alerts. Carter became rigid. We had no confirmed threat. You had Eddie Jameson. He winced. With all appropriate deference, he said, he is a gate attendant. Langston opened the folder. Within was a solitary photograph, a younger man with a more defined jawline and darker hair, yet undeniably Eddie. He was positioned beside Langston years prior, both attired in full combat equipment. Then why, she inquired, placing the photograph on the desk, is he standing alongside me in Afghanistan as my commanding officer? The room fell silent. The color drained from Carter's face. Whoa. What? Langston's tone remained steady. He directed Black Ops missions in 3 different regions, developed the threat response protocols you cursorily reviewed in basic training. The sole reason this institution isn't currently featured on the news is because a man you casually dismissed continued to perform the duties you were too arrogant to properly understand. She closed the folder. You are relieved of security oversight, effective this instant. Outside, Eddie was stationed at the gate as per his routine, acknowledging each cadet who went by with a nod. Only now, the nods he received in return carried a greater sense of gravity, a touch more uncertainty, a deeper comprehension. Cadet Arya approached, offering a small, understated salute. Sir, she said, her voice resolute. Word is that you authored the engagement manuals we currently utilize. Eddie offered a slight shrug. Someone needed to. She smiled. In that case, perhaps it is time we genuinely studied them. It was not designated a ceremony. There were no orations, no formal flag presentations, just an informational meeting in the Academy's primary hall. Attendance was compulsory, yet every seat was taken. Cadets were seated in quietude. Officers occupied the rear of the hall. The lectern stood unoccupied for longer than anticipated. Then General Langston made her entrance. She did not present any visual aids. She presented a name. Edward Jameson, she commenced. A number of you knew him simply as Eddie. An individual you failed to notice. An individual you underestimated. She allowed a period of silence to pervade before proceeding. You ridiculed experience. You disregarded patterns. And you very nearly suffered the consequences. No one ventured to move. He thwarted a breach without any armaments, without official standing, without a formal title, relying solely on judgment cultivated over decades. Judgment that was suppressed by arrogance. She then stepped aside and Eddie entered. He wore the same attire, moved with the same quiet gait. He offered no words initially, merely surveyed the room that had previously rendered him invisible. I didn't prevent the breach to validate anything, he stated at last. I did so because it was my assigned area and one safeguards what is directly before them. A momentary pause. That is the essence of leadership, not vociferation, not decorations. It is recognizing who is observing when you are not paying attention. He turned as if to depart, then paused. And if any among you wish to comprehend that, to truly comprehend it, I will be at the gate. Later in that week, a new sign was affixed at the western entrance, Jameson Post, in commemoration of steadfast vigilance. Eddie had not solicited it, nor did he offer any remark on it, but as he walked past it, coffee thermos in hand, he did something he had not done in 4 years. He smiled. A very slight smile. Eddie offered no farewell. No formal declaration, no parting luncheon. One morning, the West Gate simply commenced operations without his presence. A note had been left, meticulously folded, upon the desk. The vigil is perpetual. It merely transitions to new guardians. And with that, he had departed. Initially, they attempted to locate him, making calls, sending emails, but received no response. Yet every cadet, every officer understood that this was not a vanishing. It was the conveyance of a responsibility. Arya Bennett now occupied the position Eddie once held. She maintained the same bearing, the same unwavering focus. And beside her, secured within the booth, was Eddie's notebook, open to its concluding page. 6 words: respect is earned in silence daily. No elaborate instructions, no complex doctrines, merely a sentence that had attained the status of a guiding principle. Months went by. New cohorts of cadets arrived. They were told the accounts of how an unassuming gate guard had once outmaneuvered intruders, secured the compound, and put leadership in its place with nothing more than a single notebook. Most considered it mere folklore until they encountered Arya. Until they witnessed her customary pause before any significant action, her practice of walking the fence line before dawn, her method of instructing new guards not in tactical maneuvers but in the virtue of patience. She never needed to elevate her voice, yet somehow they heeded her. On a tranquil spring afternoon, a black SUV made a brief stop at the gate. An older gentleman in a time-worn coat alighted just long enough to deposit something at the post, a box enveloped in canvas. Inside, a neatly folded uniform, untouched, and a message hastily written in a recognizable script: for the next to keep watch, ensure it matters. No sender's address, no identifying mark, just an inheritance they had not anticipated but would certainly never permit to fade from memory. Eddie Jameson was not inclined to oratory. He never instructed people to accord him respect, never insisted on their allegiance, never once uttered, "I was once a person of consequence." But such declarations were unnecessary because daily, in every unobtrusive decision, he abided by 5 words he never articulated aloud: be steady. Speak only when needed. He demonstrated this when he stood his post at the gate during torrential rain, even when unobserved. He demonstrated it when he refrained from retaliating against the ridicule. He demonstrated it when he gently, quietly alerted them to the breach they chose to disbelieve. And he demonstrated it most profoundly when, after the full circumstances came to light, he declined any public recognition, declined any formal title. He had no need to recover his previous standing. He had already recovered their esteem. At Worthington Academy, it is still referred to as Jameson Post. New cadets are acquainted with the narrative during their initial orientation, not by means of a digital presentation or a memorial inscription, but by traversing the perimeter at first light in quiet contemplation, precisely as Eddie had done. Cadet Arya Bennett, now Lieutenant Bennett, maintains his notebook secured behind a glass panel, not for its mere safekeeping, but to serve as a constant reminder to all that leadership is not characterized by volume. It involves listening, it involves patience, it involves observation, and when it does express itself, it carries significance. So, indeed, Eddie Jameson never uttered the 5 words. Yet, the Academy continues to resonate with them. In every thoughtful consideration before passing judgment, in every salute rendered preemptively, in every emerging young leader who comprehends that silence, earned through dedicated service, possesses greater influence than any directive.